We're here today because we believe that health professionals have a very powerful role to play in confronting the climate crisis, not just at the bedside, but in the boardroom where billions of dollars in retirement funds savings are being invested. Climate change is a public health emergency, and yet many of the same hospitals and health systems committed to healing are still investing in the fossil fuel companies that are actively driving climate and health disasters. It just doesn't add up, and that's where this amazing campaign comes in. First, Do No Harm is about bringing our values as health professionals, and I am not a health professional, disclaimer, I support health professionals, into the financial systems that shape our future. It's about demanding and asking for climate safe retirement, and it's about organizing together to get there. This is part of the broader Climate Safe Retirement Funds webinar series, a campaign movement that's lifting up efforts from across many sectors, teachers, union members, artists, and now the healthcare community. So thank you so much for being a part of it. Next slide. We are welcoming our friends from First Do No Harm today, our campaign director. Next slide. I am really, really excited to introduce my very, very good friend, Don Lieber, who's the campaign director for First Do No Harm. Don is a longtime climate activist, a certified surgical technician, and the visionary behind this campaign. He's going to take us on a tour of the website and walk us through how this work came to be and where it's going. So thanks so much, Don, for being here. We're going to hear from you. I'm going to pass it over to you to start talking about First Do No Harm.
Thanks, Amy. And a big thanks to everyone on this call, the speakers, as well as everyone else who has joined in. It's an honor to be speaking with you together on this voice for fossil fuel divestment in the influential health sector. As Amy said, I've been a health professional in various roles for a number of years. I started out as an EMT in Portland, Oregon. A few years later, became a scrub tech, as Amy mentioned. I spent a decade in the OR at Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York City. I'm now in the OR at New Milford Hospital in Connecticut. And you can go to the next slide, Cassie. So the overlapping of my climate activism and this health sector divestment campaign started early in my years at Sloan Kettering Hospital, which also coincided with Hurricane Sandy. And this slide is a dramatic reminder to me of that. I'll just quote what it says here from one report. Superstorm Sandy pushed a wall of seawater through South Brooklyn and up Ocean Parkway towards Coney Island Hospital. Staff in the emergency room less than a mile from the iconic Coney Island boardwalk had only a few minutes to evacuate dozens of patients. And many of my nurse colleagues at that time at MSK did some other work, were called into their local hospitals. There was all kinds of patient transfers and things like that. And it got me thinking quite a bit about a little bit beyond the acute, dramatic harms directly to human health that everyone was aware of at the time, but also that this was a systemic issue for the healthcare sector, that in an existential way, climate change is having a devastating impact on our healthcare grid. That's what led me to organize at Sloan Kettering locally. I joined their sustainability team, and I became aware that around the country there were sustainability teams at hospitals working hard to decarbonize. You could go to the next screen now, Kelsey. And so I was in the sustainability team, and it dawned on me, however, that with all of the good and much needed sustainability work at these hospitals, which included things like changing anesthesia gases, localizing supply chain, reducing electricity use, creating local supplies on all levels, which is all wonderful and needed. At the same time, our healthcare institutions seem to be loudly ignoring the other, in my opinion, the other half of the picture, that while they're reducing emissions operationally under their roofs, they were at the same time investing lots of money directly into the fossil fuel producers causing these emissions in the first place. At, so let's flash ahead. So it's, as this was organizing, the health sector certainly has become aware of the dangers to the healthcare system and to global public health from climate change. Now, you could go back to the previous one. I'll get there in a minute. But in 2000, thank you. In 2021, that whole awareness took a great leap in the health community when in the New England Journal of Medicine published a landmark call to action for the health sector to decarbonize. And this was co-authored by the president of the National Academy of Medicine, Dr. Victor Zhao, and a handful of other leading experts in the health and environmental health field in the United States. So that was a huge step. Our campaign, First Do No Harm, saw this as an opportunity, and we launched formally with a published response in the New England Journal of Medicine, in response to Dr. Zhao's letter in 2022, which was co-authored by myself and two surgeons at Memorial Sloan Kettering, commending the call to action, but basically asking, hey, why are you ignoring fossil fuel investments? And our coalitions grew. We started to partner. We became a partner in the Climate Safe Pensions Network, which is a group of organizations working for divestment in other sectors and in other economic systems, such as local governments, philanthropy, the business sector, and so forth, which has seen great success. There are some 1,600 institutions across those sectors that have divested. And we are seeking the health sector to take its place on that list. So our campaign, one of our biggest actions to date became shortly after that, where we sent 75,000 letters to the National Academy of Medicine, again, urging it as the preeminent medical institution in the United States to take a leadership role and bring in fossil fuel divestment as one of its climate change objectives. Keeping in mind, it had already established a action collaborative with hospitals in the system, which exists to this day, for reducing operational reductions. You can move ahead now to the next slide. Thank you. A few months after that, our campaign published, we believe it to be the first of its kind, a report called The Biggest Malpractice, which was the first report which detailed specific fossil fuel investments in a case study group of major U.S. private health institutions. These four were Kaiser Permanente, the Mayo Clinic, Ascension Health Systems, and by a few metrics, the largest private healthcare system in the United States, HCA. Collectively, those four, based on their federal financial reporting, had over $4 billion invested in fossil fuels. As we said, this is a case study. This is four institutions out of plus minus 1,200 or so private institutions across the sector. So the health sector's funding of fossil fuels has some immense implications for emissions. A few months after this report was released, the National Academy of Medicine, circling back to them, made a surprise announcement. We sure didn't expect it, but they announced that they are divesting from fossil fuels. A wonderful step in the right direction, and we applauded them for doing that then, and we applaud them now. The context of that remains, however. The rest of the health sector has been loudly silent about its own sizable investments in fossil fuels. In the past few months, and since that time, our campaign has gotten some very generous press We've been featured in the LA Times and a few European health journals, the Environmental Health News Network, a couple of local pieces such as the St. Louis Dispatch, which addressed Ascension Health, involved investments in fossil fuels. And that brings us to where we are today. We're taking the next step in this voice. We've created a gorgeous new website, which we feel will be a hub for health professionals and others of information and action on how to move our beloved and influential health sector towards fossil fuel divestment. And you can move to the next slide now. This is just a nice little recap of some of our media that we've got. Is Jane Fonda talking about our report. Thanks, Jane. She's amazing. And the NAM announcement and the New England Journal of Medicine publications. To be clear, this step today that you're all a part of represents the next step. You're going to see a lot more of this. You could go to the next slide. Before we get into a few more specifics, and I turn it over to the speakers, I wanted to bring up very briefly kind of the science behind this. This all has to do with emissions, right? And this has direct consequences to our health sector and global health justice. Right now, there is general consensus that under current scenarios, global increase in temperatures will be about 2.7 centigrade of warming by 2021. This is based on what we see now as a flatline increase from now to then under current emission scenarios. That's if we don't if the rise in emissions remains steady. However, as we know, there's a range of predictions, and you could go to the next slide, please, to show what this means to the health sector. Just read this flat out. Looking at the climate risk to roughly 200,000 hospitals from flooding, fires, cyclones, and other weather extremes caused by climate change, this report estimated, which came out of Yale, I'd like to add, this report estimated that by the end of this century, that's 2100, year 2100, under the 2.7 scenario, 1 in 12 hospitals worldwide will be at risk, could be at risk of total or partial shutdown due to extreme weather. 1 in 12 hospitals, the majority of which are from in the global south and in communities with the least amount of resources to mitigate and adapt. So we have to hit the root cause on this. You can go to the next slide, please. However, this isn't just hypothetical. The report said by 2100, 1 in 12 global hospitals might be at risk of shutdown, okay? But we're already seeing this starting to happen in a big way. I'm just going to talk briefly about hospital evacuations already that we have seen because of extreme weather made worse from climate change. There's no screen, but hear me out here. I'm reading from my sources. 2022 to 24 wildfires in Alberta. Tennessee, Hurricane Helene, North Carolina, Hurricane Milton, Florida, Hurricane Milton. Hundreds and hundreds of patients have been evacuated. This has gone on from Greece to China. A few people might remember or have ever been aware, but in 2021, the massive flooding caused over 11,000 patients to be evacuated in one province. In Pakistan, we saw from last year's flood in 2024, 1,400 healthcare facilities, 10% of the national grid either evacuated or rendered of limited capacity. Libya, similar. Mozambique, Malawi, Madagascar. Cyclone Freddy destroyed 300 hospitals. This is already happening now. You could go to the next slide now. We have already seen supply chains affected. In the United States alone, many of you who are on the call might have experienced working in a hospital when we were told that we're not going to use IV fluid. We might have to use Gatorade. There's been studies that our national blood supply will be threatened under various scenarios of extreme weather and climate change consequences. This is a health protection issue. You could go to the next slide, please. Which brings us to the launch of our website. And this is designed as a hub for healthcare professionals to learn more about what's going on, both in terms of the resources available to learn what the acute health consequences are, the links between fossil fuels and pediatric cancers, for example, or the profound levels of pediatric asthma in India because of fossil fuel PM2 exposure. Our health institutions can't simply ignore this. They cannot ignore their investments any longer in this context. So this website will be a hub for information and also how to take action on this. So we can review the website now before we turn this over to our speakers. Yeah, the cost of the healthcare grid itself, the infrastructure, is more staggering than is generally recognized, but it ought to be. One study said that in the United States alone, I'll get to this in a second, but one study estimated that healthcare costs alone in the United States are $820 billion annually under current scenarios. This, I believe, was if you want to look for that, it's the National Natural Resource Defenses Council did a study that estimated that. Anyway, back to our website launch and our action campaign. This website represents a major next step in our voices calling on fossil fuel divestment in the health sector. So this is our homepage. What I like to say is a reminder of who we are included in this audience and who we will be talking to in the coming days and weeks. Why don't you scroll down again to the middle of that page? This is the health sector. You know, I've had the CFOs at some of the hospitals I've mentioned I worked at tell me this is too difficult. Well, we perform microsurgery. We map, if I can be casual about it, we map the freaking human genome. We can divest from fossil fuels. So this is our homepage, a lot of information about who we are, what we do. There's a tab on why. We could skip that. I invite you to, everyone on this call, to take a look. It's a gorgeous website. We want to thank our designers and the good people at Studio Lake for getting this website just right. Let's go ahead to the Health Library tab. This is a work in progress, but we're putting in some of the most striking and voluminous research done linking fossil fuels, fossil fuel production, fossil fuel exposure, and climate change to specific health risks and health injustice and health disparities around the world. You could go to the next one. The next tab, similarly, is an ongoing updated list of fossil fuel and health activism around the world. For example, Ethiopia has banned the imports of gasoline and diesel vehicles in a push to mostly in a push for electric vehicles in Ethiopia. Uganda, there's some serious fossil fuel action going on in Uganda that many media outlets in the West, don't cover, but it's here. And we need to show our solidarity across the global South, because the global South will feel the most extreme health impacts of climate change. Let's quickly move to the Act Now page. This is our call to action now. We are asking health professionals to share this far and wide. To We're asking health professionals to endorse right there our upcoming letter, which will be an openly published letter, which is accessible here, a letter to 400 plus senior executives of the largest private hospital chains in the United States. The big systems, like I mentioned a few, but many more, demanding that they take various steps towards fossil fuel divestment. We are proud to announce that even ahead of the launch of this campaign, this letter has received the endorsement of Physicians of for Social Responsibility, PSR, and the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. I believe one of the largest, if not the largest, such nurse organization in certainly in Ontario, if not Canada. This campaign is a global campaign, and we're seeking to amplify and include the voices of global health professionals. So we're particularly grateful for the nurses in Ontario and other organizations that we're now in touch with. On that website, in addition to that endorsement page, which we hope you'll all share, there's also a contact page. You can get in touch with us with any questions and sharing what you're doing at your hospital or what you're noticing in your communities in this struggle to end fossil fuel divestments as a global health and justice imperative. So with that, I think we are ready to move on to our speakers. Cassie and Amy, if you'd like to introduce the speakers, that would be great, or I can do that.
No. I got you.
Okay, Amy, you do it.
Thank you so much, Don. That was really incredible. I can't wait for everyone to dig into the website and y'all to sign the pledge. So we're gonna go keep moving. This panel that we have today is so incredible. It brings together experts from across the medical and public health landscape to explore how fossil fuel investments are harming health and why the healthcare sector has an ethical responsibility to lead in divesting. First, we're going to introduce my very good friend, Dan Cohen. Dan is the energy finance analyst with IEFA. IEFA is the Institute for Energy, Economics, and Financial Analysis. And Dan analyzes how fossil fuel volatility threatens institutional investments and works to protect retirement funds from stranded asset risk, among his many other talents and brilliance. So I am going to pass it over to Dan to break it down for us, the financial case for fossil fuel divestment. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Amy, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today. As Amy said, I'm with the Institute for Energy, Economics, and Financial Analysis. We are a global think tank with about 50 analysts working in 30 countries on all aspects of the global energy transition. And today I'm going to lay out our view of the fossil fuel sector. And that view, in essence, is that fossil fuels have lost their investment rationale. I have three main takeaways for you. First, it has become clear that you can prudently manage investment portfolios of any size without fossil fuels in the mix. Second, fossil fuels have suffered a decade of financial underperformance and face a fraught competitive landscape that they are poorly positioned to navigate. And third, fiduciaries for the investment funds managed by your institutions have numerous options available to them to mitigate the investment risks posed by fossil fuels. Next slide, please. Let's start with the pattern of financial underperformance. There was a time when fossil fuels were the largest, most important, and most profitable sector in the stock market. That time was the early 1980s, when fossil fuels made up more than 20% of the Standard & Poor's 500 stock market index, and nearly 30% in the year 1980. Today, fossil fuels are one of the smallest sectors in the market at only 3.7% as of last month. No other sector has seen this type of long-term decline from huge to small. And although traditional energy used to be a major contributor to investors' portfolios, the fact is that today it plays a much reduced role. Next slide, please. We can visualize this role by looking at the past 10 years, where the oil and gas sector in yellow notably lagged the overall stock market in blue. Now, if you happen to remove fossil fuels from the S&P 500, that's the line in black, you would have achieved an excess return of 13 percentage points, or about 50 basis points annualized over that period. Next slide, please. Looking at a shorter period, the 2.5 years since the last stock market trough in October 2022, you'll notice that fossil fuels have lagged the market since then, posting the worst performance of any sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I do. So, what about the future? It has always been true that past performance does not guarantee future results. The poor past performance of fossil fuels was largely caused by competition among the companies and countries that produce oil and gas, which dropped global prices to really challenging levels. Next slide. Major forecasters expect that commodity prices will remain low for the next several years, which would dampen medium-term profits. And in the longer term, the bigger threat is competition from non-fossil technologies. That threat is compounded by the commercial unviability of carbon capture and storage and the fossil fuel sector's apparent ambivalence about diversifying its business lines. Next slide, please. So we're looking ahead. Let's start with the non-fossil technologies. These technologies are taking growth and market share of hydrocarbons in the end uses like transportation and electric power, where carbon fuels have long dominated. I'm going to focus in on electric power just to identify where this displacement effect is most pronounced. Next slide, please. So last year, 40% of global electricity came from low carbon sources, which is a tremendous amount and not a well-known fact. The countries I want to mention on this slide are Hungary, Brazil, and Kenya. Hungary now leads the world with 25% of its electricity coming from solar. Across the Atlantic, Brazil now produces more solar power than Germany, a longtime leader, and nearly 1 in 5 residents of Kenya receive electricity through off-grid or mini-grid solar systems. These are countries that you may not think about very much when you think about fossil fuels and the global clean energy transition, but the economics driving these trends are anticipated to continue. Next slide, please. I think it's worth mentioning that the fossil fuel sector does have its own preferred low carbon technology, which is called carbon capture and storage, or CCS. If it could achieve commercial viability, CCS might reconcile fossil fuel extraction with a low carbon future. But the truth is, despite 50 years of research and development, existing CCS projects are still quite a distance from achieving the widely accepted goal that has been set for the technology of 90 to 95% capture rates of CO2 from the facility that it's put on, which is represented in this chart by the red line. The gap between actual performance and the goal really undermines CCS as a climate technology. It has other problems as well, including enormous upfront costs, unprofitable operations, and regulatory and geologic questions about safely storing such great volumes of CO2 underground. Next slide, please. Finally, the fossil fuel companies appear to be meeting some very rather existential questions about diversifying their business lines with a sense of ambivalence. In a longer session, we could discuss the challenges facing the liquefied natural gas and petrochemical businesses, but let's focus on renewable energy and power trading, where some fossil fuel companies have pledged to pivot. Few have made serious strides, and some have recently backtracked. And if you go to the next slide, please, we'll see that low carbon investment by global fossil fuel companies is growing, but in 2023, on the left-hand side, it accounted for only 3.5% of their total capital spending, with the balance going to fossil fuels. And that amount, that 3.5%, accounted for a little more than 1% of global investment into renewable energy that year. So fossil fuel companies are not making a significant contribution into into clean energy, and the advance of clean energy continues without a meaningful contribution from fossil fuels. The next slide, please. Let me close by discussing the tailwinds available to investment managers seeking to reduce a fund's exposure to fossil fuels. This is much easier now than it has been in the past. If you use active managers, they can typically accommodate any company or sector exclusions requested by the client. If you manage your public equities or corporate bonds to an index, you have the benefit of a large and growing universe of fossil-free indices to choose from. Investment managers can also execute a custom mandate in a separately managed account for more fine-grained control over the investment exposures. And finally, major asset managers are growing their low carbon offerings. This includes brand names like BlackRock, as well as niche managers like Sphere, who, for example, are providing a low carbon S&P 500 mutual fund for extremely competitive fees. Now, just to be perfectly clear, IEFA is not a registered investment advisor, and these are simply our observations of the development of this market. But the fact remains that each asset class in your portfolio can be managed towards a prudent and phased exclusion of fossil fuel holdings, as has been shown by a wide variety of leading financial institutions, including public pension funds, university endowments, retirement savings plans, and, as Don mentioned earlier, the National Academy of Medicine. So, just to summarize, given the poor historical performance of fossil fuels and the competitive challenges they face going forward, divestment is a practical and defensive strategy to defend the long term value of your investment portfolio. Thank you.
Wow. Dan has never flown through that presentation that fast before. That was amazing. I love like the facts and just like we're right down to it. Thank you so much, Dan. I hope everyone learned as much as I did. That was amazing. Our next speaker, which I'm really excited to introduce, is our friend Shweta from International Climate and Health, who's an international climate and health campaigner with the Global Climate and Health Alliance based in India. Shweta leads global advocacy on fossil fuels and health equity with over 20 years experience in environmental justice and community-based organizing. I am so excited to have her here today, and I'm going to pass it over to her.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. And congratulations, Don, Amy, and the whole team. The website is fantastic. I'm already kind of looking into the health repository, and you'll understand now why, because I'll come to that. But before I get into the core of my intervention today, next slide, please. I just want to set the context, and a lot of that has to do with what Don was mentioning earlier, that this crisis is very real, and I just want to like bring home the point that we are not talking about an occasional extreme weather event. We are not talking about something in the future. I am from India, and at this point, as of today, we're living the horrors of what climate crisis is presenting to us. The heat wave that we experience often for 3 to 4 days in mid-year, in May and June, has already begun in India. Temperatures have, for at least 3 or 4 days in New Delhi and other parts of northern India, have exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, which is about over 105 degrees Fahrenheit, if I'm not mistaken in my conversion, give or take a few degrees. And the most recent research now indicates that the survivability in India and Pakistan and northern parts of the country is at risk, and with temperatures exceeding what is Death Valley in North America in early parts of the year, and this means this is a matter of life and death. This is no less than that. And I really want to set that context very, very clear that the time for debate and discussion is over. It's time for action, and an immediate action, because we're really fighting for our survival. So it's really important to contextualize that. Now we know that the climate crisis is a fossil fuel crisis. And next slide, please. And I want to again pivot a little bit off the very important emission conversations that's been happening, because emissions are not the only issue with fossil fuels. Throughout the life cycle of fossil fuels, from extraction, exploration, refining, combustion, disposal, every aspect of a fossil economy has severe health impacts, and that impacts are also through, it mirrors throughout the human life cycle, from fetus to children, adolescent, pregnant women and individuals, elderly, throughout the human life cycle. Next slide, please. Now, what is very commonly known and rightfully so much talked about is the air pollution from fossil fuel and burning of fossil fuels, which according to WHO causes 7 million premature deaths annually. And there are more data that's coming out that's conveying the grim figures that we see. And these are not numbers. These are people, these are children, these are mothers, fathers, family members, our loved ones who we are losing because of the health impacts of air pollution alone. However, as I said, air pollution is not the only worry from fossil fuels. Next slide, please. And you will find this in the library on the website. But as I said, throughout the life cycle of the fossil economy, we have health impacts from toxic emissions, from chemicals, from accidents, from just these facilities being in our vicinity. And these are not my opinion. These are facts. These are scientifically documented evidence of poor birth outcomes, respiratory problems, cardiovascular disease, early mortality, degenerative disease. The list goes on. The other problem that I just want to flag, one more issue with the contamination and the chemical harm, is that these harms are not just midterm, chronic, or sometimes immediate and short term. The chemicals are toxic. They stay in the environment over decades and have the ability to harm us through several decades and sometimes intergenerational. So the crisis that we see with fossil fuels is immense, complicated, long, and needs that kind of strategy and thinking when we are talking about tackling the fossil fuel crisis. Now, I have just talked about, and I can talk about the health impacts from fossil fuels for forever. We can do like 3 separate sittings just on that. But quickly, next slide. So I have just talked about, like, I would say 1/3 of the health problems that we're seeing. And it's important, again, to understand that it's not a form of energy that we are talking about. We're also talking about a form of social and economic model, the fossil economy, because the behavior of the fossil fuel industry, its social impacts, also leads to tangible health harms that health professionals need to know about. The human rights abuses, the forceful displacement of indigenous people, corrupt practices, gender-based violence, substance abuse. We are seeing the impact again in real time in places. And as much, the impact is so clear and so evident, for example, in LA, Los Angeles, the parts of the city that has fossil fuel infrastructure has life expectancy that is 10 years less than the parts of the city that does not have fossil fuel infrastructure. The difference is so stark and so real in micro level, at local level. So we really need to understand the chemical impacts, the pollution, and then also the behavior of fossil fuel industry. Next slide, please. And I have just talked about the pollution. And of course, what we're talking about is how fossil fuels are fueling the climate crisis, which also is a health crisis. And it's a health crisis because it threatens our air, water, food, shelter, security, all the basics that is required to support life. I don't have to preach to the choir over here. I think everybody knows the health impacts. I have just shared my own experience from the reality in India. Next slide, please. But I really want to emphasize on the fact that people who have least contributed to this crisis and are most vulnerable and marginalized and need least uh, have the least capacity or capability to cope with the crisis are the worst impacted communities around the world. And that inequity is it's completely unacceptable. And this is information from Global Climate Risk Index, which shows that 8 out of 10 countries most vulnerable to climate risks and extreme weather events are low and middle income countries, my country being one of them. Next slide. Now, I know that the conversation is about divestment, but I couldn't stop myself from talking about the numbers and economics, because the economics are very clear. A lot of people question, like, where is the money for climate action going to come from? Where's the money for clean air program going to come from? Where's the money for sustainable and resilient healthcare going to come from? The money is there. It's just being spent in the wrong place. We are subsidizing an industry that is killing us every year with 7 trillion, roughly 7 trillion US dollars, or 7.1% of our GDP. That's the reality. Even a fraction of this money, and this number, and because I work in the health space, is two-thirds of global, combined global healthcare spending. That's so we're spending almost equal in something that is killing us as much as we're spending in protecting life. And that's profound and sad, and that needs to change. And even a fraction of that money invested in clean energy, in healthy cities, in healthy policies would just as I said, is a matter of life and death, and would save millions of lives. Next slide. So, with all of this context, my case to all of you is that we really need to urgently shift away from fossil fuels and invest and build in health-based just transition towards clean energy, towards healthy societies, and towards a more and in imagining a more just and equitable societies. I think I have two more slides, but I can skip through that, because I was going to make more a stronger case for health-based just transition, but I'm out of time, and I'm happy to talk about it in another session, as I promised.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. That I again learned an incredible amount. I can't wait to watch this webinar twice. So then our next speaker is someone who actually has to get to work. So I am going to introduce Dr. Joe Vivon, who is an emergency physician and member of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. Joe has over 20 years of ER experience and is a national leader in climate and public health advocacy through CAPE, Calgary Climate Hub, and COVID era coalitions. Welcome, Joe.
Well, thanks for letting me be a part of this. This is really amazing and really, really important, because we're in a climate crisis. Like this isn't a game. This isn't some kind of political chess match where the fossil fuel industry moves here and sees that they can win, and then the climate people move over there and see if they can best them. We're in a fight for our lives, and I think Shweta has really underlined the impact in her own home country. And I don't have any pretty slides, but I'm going to tell a few stories about some of the impacts that I've seen in my home province of Alberta. I live in a pretty unique place because even though I care deeply about the future of my children's world and my own world, I live on the front lines of a fossil fuel state. We actually are very much a petro state here in Alberta. But I got to be a little bit of a part of our own little victory here, because we, over a decade ago, started to work on phasing out coal-fired power pollution here. And we actually won. When we started in 2012, it was 80% of our electricity grid. The last coal-fired power plant closed in June of this year, which is truly amazing that we accomplished basically eliminating 6% of Canada's emissions, GHG emissions, over a decade. So it can be done, and it can have an impact on health. And a lot of the framing that we used for our coal phase out was to talk about the immediate impacts of air pollution on the people surrounding us. And so it's really important to understand that as humans, we have a real short-term look at the world. So when we see the world, it's much harder for us to envision millions or billions of deaths decades from now. It's much easier for us to understand the impacts right here, right now. And certainly, as Shweta has said, we are having those impacts as we speak on the ground, even in a cold country like mine in Canada. The first story I want to tell about is the 2021 heat dome, which impacted both BC and Alberta. We are a very northern country. We do not have the infrastructure that allows us to deal with heat very well. And so when this heat dome settled on us in June of 2021, we started having people dying. And as Shweta said, on the macro geopolitical sphere, it impacts the most vulnerable countries. Even on a microcosm, it impacts the most vulnerable people. The people that were dying were the elderly. They were the poor that couldn't afford, air conditioning in their systems. Very much the people with mental health issues because their pharmaceuticals, their medications predispose them to having problems. And we had over 600 people die in our two provinces, which was the number one weather-related natural disaster affecting mortality in Canada's history. And we really didn't draw notice to that. A lot of people that flew under the radar, that how impactful that was. Next, of course, we have recurrent wildfires in our area. In fact, if you live in the eastern United States, you may have been impacted by our wildfire smoke because a few years ago, it swept across the entire country and ended up settling over the east, which is one of the few times where that area of the world has been that impacted by wildfire. But we get that every single year. So to talk a little bit about wildfire smoke, the worst part of wildfire smoke is this thing called PM 2.5, although there's a whole mix of pollutants in wildfire smoke. Anytime you burn anything, you create air pollution. And the air pollution from wildfires is very, very similar to what you would get from a coal-fired power plant. So what I see on the front lines predominantly during the event is respiratory problems. So you'll have people who come in with predisposing conditions like asthma or COPD, also known as smoker's lung, and they will be unable to breathe. And in fact, some of the most memorable people that I have from my practice is those people who not only had impacts during those acute events, but also the period following them for months. They never really recovered back to their baseline respiratory health. Of course, it doesn't just impact the patients that I see, it impacts me suddenly and my children. Suddenly my kids and myself, we are unable to go outside, do the things that we love and that really nurture us being in the outdoors. We're forced to stay indoors and protect ourselves from that air pollution. A lot of the deaths are hidden because it's not like I can see a person in the emerge and know for sure that it was the wildfire smoke that had an impact on them. A lot of those impacts are found in the mortality statistics. And so we know that not only does it impact respiratory health, but that PM 2.5 is so small, it absorbs through the lungs into the bloodstreams and has systemic impacts. And some of those impacts are strokes, heart attacks, arrhythmias, and you'll see a bump in the mortality during those events. The final thing I really want to draw attention to that I'm seeing in my world is the impact on evacuations of communities. Every year we have major evacuations. This year in August and September, it was the town of Jasper who had to evacuate multiple thousands of people. And a couple of years ago, it was the capital city of the Northwest Territories called the Yellowknife. When a population is evacuated, they lose two things. They lose their stability in their lives, and they also lose their primary care. So I would see people coming in through the door that would be very normally stable in their own community, but because they've been displaced, because they may not have access to their medications, or sometimes with substance abuse disorders, they have no longer access to the substances that are they're reliant on. Then they come into our hospital and have to be admitted for care. And there's also the tragic PTSD that comes from having your community evacuated or losing your home. So I'm very lucky, and unlike the United States, that I live in a place where we don't have private healthcare. So there are no private hospitals to be divesting. And I say lucky because I think we have a very functional. Nobody ever goes bankrupt in Canada from being unwell. But we do have other things I want to draw attention to, and that's institutions, whether it's universities, whether it's medical organizations, and I want to call on them to consider divesting from fossil fuels. In very many ways, this battle is similar to that which we undertook for tobacco. For a long time, it was basically verboten for physicians or physician or medical organizations to invest in tobacco institutions, and we successfully made that. Uh, Basically, people would say you can't be. It's against what you believe in as a medical doctor. And I feel we need to have the same kind of anger towards institutions that are now investing in fossil fuels, because again, it's having harm on us. First, do no harm. So I care about this deeply. I'm so glad that somebody's taken this forward, and I really want to support the work that's being done here. So, to the organizers, let me know how we can work on this together going forward. Back to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. And good luck. And off to work you go. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are very grateful. All right. I am very excited. Oh, this person. I am very excited to introduce Dr. Doris Grisfun, the CEO of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. Doris is a global nursing leader and a vocal advocate for climate justice and environmental health in healthcare systems. Welcome, Doris. You're muted.
Yay, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Amy. First, my very deep gratitude to you, Don Lieber, the global really leader on this, and to you, Amy, and the entire team at First Do Not Harm. You are doing a mammoth job. I have lived, I have studied, and I have worked in the US. And I say with huge sorrow that I hardly can recognize the country today. The political climate that you face is deeply troubling. And I offer, and we at Areneo offer our unwavering support and solidarity, and that's why we are deeply involved and will continue to be involved with you as a largest nursing professional association in Canada, Don. You are correct, in Canada, and quite frankly, in many other parts of the world. Areneo and our more than 54,400 members are committed fully to confronting the climate emergency. I speak as a nurse and as a mother and grandmother, horrified by the unstable, volatile planet we are handing to our children and grandchildren. I look at them and I am ashamed. How did we allow it to reach this point, colleagues? How did we, those of us that are committed, didn't push even harder? So I guess my last plea at the end, it is let's push even harder. Pope Francis, who died so close to Earth Day, knew the answer when he said, a selfish and boundless thirst of power and material prosperity leads both to the misuse of available natural resources and to the exclusion of the weak and disadvantaged. All of you, the speakers, and all of you that are attending today believe on that, and we know it is true. In Canada, we continue the struggle for a healthy future. Next Monday, my colleague Joe didn't mention that. Next Monday, we hit to the polls in a federal election that will be consequential on determining whether we continue to pursue climate action or move full tilt if we get the opposition leader, Mr. Poliev, full tilt with fossil fuel consumption. And we cannot leave politics out because this is all about politics. And again, my friend Joe spoke about we don't have private health care. Well, his province is leading the charge, and mine is not far behind on trying to push that too. So we need to be on guard. We need to absolutely stop this because this is following the damaging direction that you colleagues are facing in the US and that our colleague that spoke from India is also facing. At Areneo, environmental leadership is long-standing. We have consistently been central as an association, the largest one, in the health sector advocating for climate action. In Ontario, first jurisdiction in North America, we phased out coal-fired plants in 2014. I was part of that initiative, very, very heavily involved, and we eliminated cosmetic pesticides even earlier in 2009. We celebrated with then Minister Gerritsen, retired now, but his son is an MP, at RNO's home office with all the partners. All the partners came to RNO home office to celebrate those two successes that no one thought we can do. RNO integrates environmental determinants of health into all health policy documents. You can see if you Google the platform, both the provincial and federal, you will see environmental crisis and environmental action there. The Ontario Nurses for the Environment, one, and interest is an interest group of RNO. They are keen to this effort, and Rob Samolak and many of his members, of the members of our interest group, Rob is the chairperson, is with us today. 2 years ago, working with our allies, Shift Action, we issued an open letter to the Healthcare Ontario Pension Plan, HOOP, which manages the retirement saving of most nurses in Ontario and other healthcare workers too. And by the way, also RNO is part of it. We demanded, not urged, demanded complete divestment from fossil fuels as, as the largest pension fund in Ontario health sector. HOOP has a pivotal role, as Don mentioned about other pension plans, a pivotal role to play. Our call was rooted in science and grounded in the realities nurses confront every day. Children with asthma, as was mentioned, triggered by smoke-filled skies, families displaced by floods, and individuals battling anxiety and despair amid growing environmental devastation. Continuing to invest in fossil fuels as first do not harm, powerful argues, is nothing short of professional malpractice. We are bound by that commitment. Do not harm. The past few years have shown the brutal reality of climate change in Canada. Record freaking wildfires, thick smoke blanket our cities, and the hottest summer on record, both globally and nationally. Nova Scotia endured lethal flooding. The West faced deepening droughts. The earth was inundated. The east was inundated. Hurricane Lee battered the Atlantic, while a violent ice storm hit Montreal and Ottawa. Even amidst warming, freak cold snaps illustrated the deepening instability of our climate situation. Climate catastrophe, as my colleagues previously said, is not a distant prospect. It's unfolding before our eyes, and it is driven by a fossil fuel industry that profits from destruction. To allow our pension plans to bankroll this harm is a betrayal to our duty to protect health. Besides, how can we continue to invest the pension plans on fossil fuels when the pension plans are to live actually a good life after retirement? Is unconscionable. That is why Do Not Harm campaign speaks so clearly to nurses and health workers, and why we absolutely urge everybody to join, as Don already put in the website, and Amy too. If insurance companies are starting to sound the alarm about the financial risk of climate inaction, why are so many pension funds in healthcare still entangled in fossil fuel investments? How can we justify jeopardizing the well-being of communities we are sworn to serve as health professionals? Our friends at Shift Action, Adam Scott, who is here today, and Laura McGreen keep tabs on Hoop investments, with their most recent report card showing about 1.5 billion in fossil fuels, including investments in Alberta oil sands, among the dirtiest form of energy anywhere. In our joint open letter, I'm getting messages here and they're bothering me tremendously, so I'm going to turn them off. Sorry about that. In our joint open letter, we call for an immediate end to new fossil fuel investment, a fast track divestment of existing holdings, and proactive engagement with portfolio companies, especially banks, to demand rapid decarbonization. I was thrilled to hear this week from Laura McGrath from Shift Action, who is attending this webinar. Thanks, Laura, and thanks for your leadership and for Shift leadership. And just finished to review the analysis of Hoop annual report. Laura found measurable, although not yet sufficient in our view, progress in terms of Hoop climate targets. For example, she said to us, Hoop no longer has a fossil fuel entanglement direct on its board. That is significant. Hoop has already met its 2030 emission reduction targets. Again, good news, although the targets lack ambition. Hoop has increased its green investments, and now 21% of the companies in its infrastructure and private equity portfolios that have credible net zero transition plans. The lesson is clear. There is a long way, and the kind of serious activists led by Shift Action with partners like RNO and led by Don and Amy with partners all over the world produce results, and we should triple our efforts. We should double down on them. We at RNO lead by example. Our investments portfolio has excluded fossil fuel for many, many years. Line by line, I review those with our investor partners. And we are financially, as the first speaker said, stronger, not weaker. We are both stronger with our pillow and can sleep in peace, and we are stronger financially because of it. And we can speak with clear morals because we are doing what we preach. We are living proof that the notion that sustainable and fiscal prudence are at odds is a myth. It's not a myth, it's a reality. In fact, ethical investment is sound stewardship. Our board of directors, our 54,000 plus members are proud of that, and they go with us all the way. Climate action must be embedded at the core of health system transformation. RNO is finalizing a major report on restructuring healthcare to be more community-based, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and publicly delivered. One of its key recommendations in this report, coming on May 12th, is the explicit incorporation on environmental determinants of health into governance and decision-making. Thanks, Matt and policy team, for working with me and others on this report. With climate action treated as a system-level imperative, this is not a side recommendation, is intrinsic to all the system level imperatives that we have on healthcare. Every health organization, and especially those managing significant investment, must be part of this shift. To Don Lieber, to Amy, and our colleagues in the US and elsewhere, we stand with you. We need to double down on the efforts. This global campaign is courageous, principled, and urgent. Together, let us demand, not ask, demand that every major health organization and pension fund divest from destruction and invest in life. And let's also demand, as our colleague that spoke from India says, that we go beyond also only pension plans to every single health system restructuring or health system policy that we have. We need to include environmental stewardship, environmental action, environmental justice in all the health policy aspects of our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Grinspan.
I am in tears. I'm so inspired. That made my whole day, that speech. Thank you so much for being here. That was so incredible. I apologize, everyone. I know we went over. We all like to talk a lot, and that's okay. This is a good topic to be a little bit over time on. But I just wanted to thank our panelists deeply for being with us today, and to thank you all so much for joining us and standing with healthcare workers who are leading the charge for climate safe retirements and pensions. This movement is growing, and your voice is a critical part of it. Let's quickly talk about what you can do today to help us. The next steps are really simple but powerful. You can sign the pledge, you can share the campaign, and you can organize in your workplace. I am going to drop some amazing links in the chat for everyone. There will also be a follow-up email that will contain all of this information, so please don't feel like you have to grab it out of the chat. I just dropped them there, so if you want to grab them right away, you can. But the healthcare sector can lead on climate, and we're proving that together. I want to thank you all again for showing up. Let's keep building. You're not in this alone. We're building a collective, and we need your voice in the mix. And Dawn, as our campaign director, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, real quick. An immense thanks to the speakers and to the viewers here. We had a nice turnout, and I'm going to close by saying we can make this happen. We're the health sector. It's not about like me. It's not even about the campaign per se. It's a message that is now being unified across borders. We're the doctor from Canada. I'm on the East Coast, and we had a wonderful speaker in India. Finally, the healthcare voice from around the world is coming together on this most important issue. So let's continue doing that together. We will be in touch. We look forward to working with you. Sign the letter. Share it, please, with your networks. We will make this happen. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.